The spinning class excuse was getting old. 3 nights a week, Sienna would grab her gym bag, kiss me on the cheek with those perfectly glossed lips, and disappear until nearly midnight. She never came home sweaty, never smelled like exertion, just that same vanilla perfume she'd worn since college, maybe a little stronger, like she'd reapplied it somewhere. I'm Evan Tyler, and I used to believe in the simple things: marriage, family, the idea that when your wife says she's working out, she's actually working out. But sitting in my leather recliner at 11:47 p.m., watching the driveway for headlights that wouldn't appear for another hour, I was starting to think I'd been managing the wrong project all these years. My name's on marine engineering contracts worth millions. I can coordinate dock construction, manage teams of 50 people, and solve problems that would make most men's heads spin. But I couldn't figure out why my wife's spinning classes never seemed to involve any actual spinning. The house felt too quiet. Ava, my 14-year-old, was upstairs doing homework with her door cracked open just enough to let the hallway light spill across her desk. Tommy, barely 3 years old, had been asleep since 8, his tiny fist clutched around a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. These were the moments when the silence pressed against my eardrums like deep water. I was reaching for the remote when I noticed Ava's backpack slumped against the kitchen island. A corner of white paper peeked out from the front pocket, folded but not quite hidden. Something about it looked deliberate, placed, not dropped. The paper felt expensive between my fingers, heavy stock, the kind you'd use for wedding invitations or funeral announcements.
Ask your wife about the trainer. My first thought was practical, the way my mind always worked through problems. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to deliver this message. They'd waited for the right moment, probably watched our house, learned our routines. They knew Ava's schedule, knew she'd find it first, knew she'd bring it home where I'd eventually see it. The second thought hit harder. Someone wanted me to know something badly enough to involve my daughter. I folded the paper and slipped it into my wallet, right behind my driver's license where I'd see it every day. Then I walked to the window and looked out at our perfectly manicured suburban street. Every house looked the same in the darkness. Perfect lawns, perfect driveways, perfect secrets hidden behind perfect facades. When Sienna's headlights finally swept across the driveway at 12:23 a.m., I was ready. She came through the garage door looking exactly like someone who'd spent 3 hours in intense cardio. Which is to say, she looked like she'd spent 3 hours somewhere else entirely. "How was class?" I asked from the kitchen table, where I'd positioned myself with a cup of coffee and a stack of work papers. "Brutal," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Micah really pushed us tonight." Micah? The trainer had a name. Sounds intense. Maybe I should try it sometime. She froze for just a moment, her hand halfway to the refrigerator handle. "It's really advanced, Evan. You'd need to work up to it." "I'm sure I could handle whatever Micah dishes out." The way she said goodnight sounded more like goodbye. After she went upstairs, I sat in the dark kitchen and thought about patterns. In my work, patterns meant everything. Stress fractures in metal, tide schedules, weather systems. Everything followed patterns if you knew how to look. Sienna's pattern was becoming clear. 3 nights a week, same excuse, same mysterious exhaustion that left her looking refreshed. The way she'd started showering immediately when she got home, instead of collapsing on the couch like she used to. The way her phone was always face down now, always on silent. I pulled out my laptop and did what any reasonable husband would do in 2023. I opened our shared phone plan account and looked at her location history, the Find My feature we'd set up years ago for safety, back when trust wasn't a luxury I couldn't afford. According to her phone's GPS, Sienna had spent the evening at 124-7 Riverside Drive. I pulled up the address on Google Maps. It wasn't a gym. It was a converted warehouse apartment complex in the part of town where young professionals lived when they wanted to feel edgy but not actually unsafe. I zoomed in on the street view, studying the building's entrance, the parking situation, the sight lines from the street. Old habits from my engineering days. Always survey the terrain before you start building anything, even if what you're building is a case against your own wife. The coffee had gone cold, but I kept drinking it anyway. Bitter seemed appropriate. Upstairs, I could hear Sienna moving around in our bedroom, probably changing into those silk pajamas she'd started wearing instead of the old college t-shirts I used to love. Everything about her had gotten more polished in the past year,
more deliberate, more like she was performing the role of wife instead of actually being one. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook I used for project planning. My office at Coastal Marine Engineering occupied the third floor of a converted warehouse downtown, close enough to the harbor that I could smell salt air when the wind was right. I'd been there 8 years, working my way up from junior project manager to senior partner, specializing in the kind of complex harbor installations that required someone who understood both the technical challenges and the human element of getting things built. "You look like someone who didn't get enough sleep," said Janet, our office manager, when I walked past her desk at 7:30 a.m. "Late night working on the Portland project," I lied smoothly. "You know how it is." But instead of diving into the Portland Harbor expansion plans, I found myself staring out my office window toward the general direction of Riverside Drive, thinking about patterns and timing and the weight of that note in my wallet. At lunch, instead of grabbing my usual sandwich at the deli downstairs, I drove back to Riverside Drive. The coffee shop on the ground floor was called Grind, which seemed a little too on the nose for my current situation. I ordered a black coffee and took a table by the window with a clear view of the apartment building's entrance. The barista was a college-aged kid with the kind of carefully maintained stubble that probably took longer to achieve than my wife's spinning class routine. His name tag read Brandon. "You waiting for someone?" Brandon asked, wiping down the table next to mine. "Just enjoying the view," I said. "Yeah, this is a great spot for people watching. You see all kinds of interesting stuff from here." I looked up from my coffee. "Such as?" Brandon glanced around the nearly empty shop, then leaned closer. "Well, there's this one lady who comes by 3 nights a week."
It was about Mom, wasn't it? The wooden spoon felt heavy in my hand. "Ava, it's okay," she said. "I'm not stupid. I know something's been weird around here." Before I could respond, Sienna appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed in her workout clothes and carrying that same gym bag she'd been carrying for months. She looked like a fitness magazine cover, all coordinated colors and strategic styling. "I'm heading out," she announced, kissing the top of Tommy's head where he sat in his high chair, methodically destroying a handful of crackers. "Have fun at spinning," I said. "Always do." She paused at the door, and for a moment I thought she might say something else. Instead, she just smiled that perfect smile and left. Ava and I ate dinner in relative quiet, with Tommy providing commentary in the form of enthusiastic babbling and strategic food throwing. After I got him cleaned up and settled in front of his favorite cartoon, Ava helped me load the dishwasher. "Dad," she said, handing me a plate, "whatever you're planning to do about Mom, just remember that some of us are on your side." The plate nearly slipped from my hands. "Ava, I'm 14, not 4. I see things. I hear things." She looked older than her years in that moment, standing in our kitchen with her arms crossed and her jaw set. And I know the difference between someone who's working out and someone who's working on something else. That night, after both kids were asleep, I sat at my computer and did what I do best: research. Micah's gym was called Elevation Fitness, and their website featured plenty of photos of their training staff. It didn't take long to find him. Micah Vale, 28 years old, certified personal trainer, specializes in intensive one-on-one sessions. His professional headshot showed the kind of guy who'd never had to wonder if his wife was having an affair because women lined up to have affairs with him. His social media was public, which seemed like poor planning for someone conducting an affair with a married woman. Lots of gym selfies, motivational quotes about pushing past your limits, and photos from what looked like expensive restaurants and bars around town. I scrolled back through several months of posts, looking for anything that might connect him to Sienna. There, a photo from 3 months ago, taken at Marcello's, the Italian place downtown. In the background, barely visible but unmistakably there, sat Sienna at a corner table. She was laughing at something, her hand reaching across the table towards someone outside the frame. The timestamp showed 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday, one of her spinning class nights. I screenshotted the image and saved it to a folder on my desktop labeled Project Documentation. Then I leaned back in my chair and considered my options. I could confront Sienna directly, but that would give her a chance to prepare, to craft explanations, to turn the situation around on me somehow. I could hire a private investigator, but that felt like admitting defeat, like I couldn't handle my own problems. Or I could do what I'd always done when faced with a complex project: gather all the information first, understand the full scope of the problem, then develop a comprehensive solution. The notebook came out of my desk drawer again. On a fresh page, I wrote, Micah Vale, Elevation Fitness, 28 years old. Underneath that, next steps, direct observation, additional evidence gathering, stakeholder analysis. In my professional life, stakeholder analysis meant identifying everyone who had an interest in the outcome of a project. In this case, the stakeholders were obvious: me, Sienna, the kids, both our families, our friends, our social circle, and Micah, of course, who probably thought he was just having fun with a bored housewife, not realizing he'd picked a fight with someone who specialized in solving complex problems. I was still writing when I heard Sienna's car in the driveway, 12:34 a.m., right on schedule. I closed the notebook and put it away, then went upstairs to pretend I was asleep. She slipped into bed 45 minutes later, smelling like that vanilla perfume and something else I couldn't quite identify, something that didn't belong in our bedroom. I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathing settle into the rhythm of sleep, and thought about foundation problems. How sometimes you could shore up a damaged structure, but sometimes the only solution was to tear everything down and start over. The question was, what kind of foundation was I building now? Friday morning brought rain and the kind of gray sky that made everything look washed out and temporary. I stood at my office window, watching water streak down the glass, and thought about timing. In construction, timing was everything. Pour concrete too early and it wouldn't set properly. Wait too long and you'd miss your window entirely. The parking garage had security cameras. The lobby probably had them too. If I needed additional evidence, there might be ways to obtain it. But first, I had Tuesday's appointment to get through. My chance to meet Micah face to face and see exactly what kind of man my wife had chosen over me. I closed the laptop and went upstairs, where Sienna was pretending to sleep, and I was about to start pretending the same thing. Just 2 more performances in a marriage that had apparently become nothing but theater. The difference was, I was finally ready to change the script. Tuesday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth and the kind of golden light that made everything look like a movie set. I dropped the kids at my parents' house, telling them I had a work meeting that might run late. My mother gave me one of those looks that suggested she knew more than she was letting on, but she just hugged Tommy and promised Ava they could make cookies while I was gone. Sienna left for her spinning class at 8:45, right on schedule. I waited 15 minutes, then drove to Elevation Fitness for my 9 p.m. consultation with Micah Vale. The gym was smaller than it looked from the outside, all exposed brick and industrial lighting designed to make people feel like they were training for something important. The receptionist, a young woman with the kind of muscle definition that suggested she practiced what the gym preached, checked me in and pointed toward the training area. Micah will be right with you, she said. He's just finishing up with another client. I took a seat on a bench near the windows and watched Micah work with a middle-aged man who was clearly struggling with whatever routine had been designed for him. Micah was encouraging but firm, the kind of trainer who pushed people past their comfort zones while making them feel like heroes for the effort. He was younger than I'd expected, probably closer to 25 than 30, with the kind of build that came from genetics as much as training. Not particularly tall, but proportioned in a way that suggested he'd never had to work very hard to get attention from women. The kind of guy who'd probably been told he was special since he was old enough to understand the concept. When the session ended and his client headed toward the locker room, Micah walked over with his hand extended and a smile that was probably worth half his income. "You must be Evan," he said. "I'm Micah. Ready to talk about your fitness goals?" His handshake was firm but not aggressive, the grip of someone who was confident enough not to prove anything. Up close, I could see what Sienna found attractive: the easy charm, the way he made eye contact like you were the most interesting person he'd met all day. "I'm interested in your evening programs," I said. "I understand you offer some specialized training." "Absolutely. I work with a lot of professionals who need flexible scheduling. What kind of results are you looking for?" We moved to a quieter corner of the gym, near the weights section. Micah grabbed a clipboard and started asking the standard questions about my fitness background, health issues, exercise goals. I answered honestly, watching his face for any sign of recognition. If Sienna had mentioned her husband, he gave no indication of knowing who I was. "So you're thinking 3 nights a week?" he asked, making notes on his form. "That seems to work well for a lot of people. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday maybe? Those are popular slots."
Just some scheduling issues with my trainer. Problems with the spinning class? Something like that. Ava looked up from her cereal, catching the tension in the room with the radar that teenagers develop for adult drama. She didn't say anything, but I saw her filing away the information for later analysis. That evening, Sienna didn't go to spinning class. Instead, she claimed she needed to work late, staying at her office until nearly 10 p.m. I knew because I drove by her building twice, seeing her car in the parking lot both times, the lights on in her third-floor office window. Thursday followed the same pattern. No spinning class, another late night at the office, more anxious phone checking. By Friday, she looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. I, on the other hand, had never felt more alert. Friday afternoon, I got a call at work from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Evan Tyler." "Mr. Tyler? This is Cassie Morrison, Sienna's friend. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee sometime soon. There are some things I think you should know." Cassie Morrison. I knew the name. Sienna's college roommate, now a lawyer specializing in family law. They had stayed close over the years, the kind of friendship that involved weekly phone calls and monthly girls' nights out. If anyone knew about Sienna's extracurricular activities, it would be Cassie. "What kind of things?" I asked. "The kind that are better discussed in person. Are you free tomorrow morning?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, not the Grind, where Brandon and I had developed our surveillance partnership, but a more upscale place where lawyers and other professionals conducted the kind of conversations that required neutral territory. I've been Sienna's friend for 15 years, but I can't be part of what she's planning. Which is? She wants to make it look like you're the problem, claim emotional neglect, maybe hint at controlling behavior, paint herself as the victim who finally found the courage to leave. "And you don't think that's accurate?" Cassie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sienna's been planning this for months. The affair with Micah isn't some spontaneous thing. It's part of a larger strategy. She wants out of the marriage, but she wants to keep the house, primary custody of the kids, and as much of your assets as possible." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've seen what she's capable of when she wants something, and because those kids don't deserve to be weapons in whatever war she's planning to start." I sipped my coffee, thinking about patterns and timing and the careful way Sienna had been documenting our conversations lately, always steering them toward topics where I might say something that could be used against me later. "What exactly has she asked you to help her with?" "Research mostly. She wanted to know about hidden assets, about how to prove emotional abandonment, about custody laws in cases where one parent travels frequently for work." Cassie paused. "She also asked me about restraining orders." "Restraining orders? How to get them, what kind of evidence is required, how they affect custody decisions." The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm. "She's planning to claim I'm dangerous? She's planning to claim whatever gives her the best advantage in court." I set down my cup and looked at Cassie across the table. "Why are you really here? This isn't just about protecting the kids." "You're right. I know who takes care of us and who just pretends to." "Ava, I'm just saying, when people start asking questions about what kind of parents you and Mom are, I'm going to tell the truth." That evening, after the kids were in bed, Sienna and I sat in the living room pretending to watch a movie while both of us thought about secrets and strategies and the careful timing of revelations. She didn't know that I knew about her plans, but I was beginning to understand that she didn't know me as well as she thought she did either. The next phase was going to require perfect timing and flawless execution. But then again, that's what I did for a living. My cousin Natalie's wedding was scheduled for the third Saturday in October at the family estate my grandparents had built in the 1940s overlooking Casco Bay. It was the kind of venue that appeared in Maine tourism brochures: sprawling lawns, weathered shingle architecture, views that made people understand why some families never left New England. It was also the perfect stage for what I had planned. The attorney Cassie had recommended, David Brennan, turned out to be exactly what I needed, a man who specialized in what he called preemptive defense strategies and who understood that sometimes the best way to handle a legal problem was to make sure it never made it to court. "Your wife is planning to ambush you," he'd said during our Monday morning consultation. "The question is, do you want to be ambushed or do you want to ambush back? What are my options?" Legally, you could file first, beat her to the courthouse, control the narrative from the beginning, but based on what you've told me about her strategy, I think there's a better approach. Which is public disclosure. He was also the only family member who'd had regular access to our house during the time period when Tommy would have been conceived. Getting Ben's DNA had been trickier, but not impossible. A family barbecue the weekend before the wedding provided the opportunity I needed. While Ben was distracted by a football game on TV, I'd collected his beer bottle and stored it carefully for testing. The results of that test had arrived Friday morning, 99.7% probability of paternity. My brother was Tommy's father. My wife had been having an affair for years longer than I'd realized, and the child I'd been raising as my son was actually my nephew. The knowledge sat in my chest like a weight, but also like fuel. Every time I looked at Tommy, I felt the same love I'd always felt. Biology didn't change that. But every time I looked at Sienna or Ben, I felt something colder and more focused. They'd made me an unwitting participant in their deception. They'd let me change diapers and wake up for midnight feedings and worry about a child's future while knowing the entire time that they'd built our family on a lie. That was going to end today. The wedding ceremony was beautiful, the kind of October afternoon that made people fall in love with New England. Natalie looked radiant in her grandmother's dress, and her new husband looked like a man who couldn't believe his luck. The whole event felt like something from a different era, when people believed in permanence and families were exactly what they appeared to be. Sienna sat beside me in the third row, wearing a blue dress that brought out her eyes, and holding Tommy on her lap while he tried to grab the flowers in the arrangement at the end of our pew. To anyone watching, we looked like the perfect family. Successful husband, beautiful wife, adorable children. The irony wasn't lost on me. During the cocktail hour, I worked the crowd like I was running for office. I talked to my parents, my aunts and uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. I made sure everyone saw me being charming and normal and exactly the kind of person they'd always known me to be. Ben was there too, of course, playing his usual role as the fun uncle who could make Tommy laugh and who always had time for whatever game Ava wanted to play. Watching him with Tommy, knowing what I now knew, was like seeing a completely different movie than the one I'd been watching for 3 years. The dinner reception was held in a tent on the lawn, with round tables for 8 and a view of the bay that made everyone's photos look professional. I'd specifically requested that our family table include my parents, Sienna's parents, Ben, and my Aunt Ruth, who'd been collecting and distributing family gossip for 60 years, and who had the kind of memory that made her dangerous to people with secrets. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and people might leave before the story had a chance to spread. Too late, and the alcohol would make everything messier than it needed to be. I waited until the main course had been served and cleared, when people were relaxed but still alert, when the photographer was taking a break and the band was setting up for dancing. Then I stood up and tapped my wine glass with a knife. "Excuse me, everyone. I'd like to make a toast." The conversations around our table died down. Other tables began to quiet as well, the way they do when someone's about to make a speech at a family event. "Evan, stop this!" "But that's not the most interesting part," I said, still looking at Ben. "The most interesting part is what I discovered when I decided to get some DNA testing done." Ben started to stand up, but my father's hand on his shoulder kept him in his chair. It turns out that Tommy, the little boy I've been raising as my son for 3 years, isn't actually my son at all. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded lab results. He's my nephew. His biological father is my brother Ben. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Then Aunt Ruth said, in a voice that carried to every table in the tent, "Well, I'll be damned." Sienna screamed. Not a shout or an exclamation, but an actual scream,
the kind of sound someone makes when they've been backed into a corner with no way out. She stood up so quickly that her chair fell backward, and for a moment I thought she might try to grab the lab results from my hand. Instead, she looked around the table at faces that had gone from confused to shocked to something that might have been disgust, and she ran. Straight out of the tent, across the lawn, toward the parking area where her car was waiting. Ben tried to follow her, but my father's grip on his shoulder tightened. "Sit down, Benjamin," my father said, using the full name that meant Ben was in the kind of trouble that didn't have easy solutions. "Dad, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," my father said, "but first you're going to sit there and listen to what your brother has to say." I looked around the table at my family, these people who'd known me since birth and who were trying to process information that redefined everything they thought they understood about the past 3 years. Ben had moved to Portland, where he'd found work with a construction company and was supposedly trying to figure out how to be a responsible adult. He sent birthday cards to both kids and called occasionally, but we hadn't seen him since the wedding. I thought that was probably best for everyone involved. Sienna had rented a small apartment across town and was working for a different company, having left her old job under circumstances that were never fully explained to me. She saw the kids every other weekend and one evening during the week, visits that were civil but not warm. Ava tolerated these visits with the kind of patience that suggested she was counting down until she turned 18. Tommy, now 3.5, treated them like any other routine and seemed equally happy whether he was with her or with me. The anonymous note that had started everything remained a mystery. I'd never figured out who'd sent it or how they'd known about Sienna's affair. Sometimes I wondered if it had been someone from the gym, or maybe another wife who'd discovered her own husband's involvement with Micah. But in the end, it didn't matter. The truth had a way of coming out eventually, with or without anonymous helpers. What mattered was what came next. Ava was thriving in high school, having inherited my analytical mind and her mother's social skills, but none of Sienna's need to manipulate situations to her advantage. She'd taken the divorce and all its revelations with remarkable maturity, and had become fiercely protective of Tommy in a way that made me proud and slightly worried about any boys who might eventually want to date her. Tommy was growing into a funny, smart kid who loved construction trucks and elaborate bedtime stories, and had no idea that the circumstances of his birth had once threatened to tear our family apart. He called me Dad and Ben Uncle Ben, and seemed to understand instinctively that some family relationships were more complicated than others. As for me, I'd learned that surviving betrayal wasn't just about getting revenge or winning legal battles. It was about deciding what kind of person you wanted to be when the crisis was over, what kind of life you wanted to build from the pieces that were left. I'd chosen to build something better than what I'd had before. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if removing the weight of lies and secrets had changed its fundamental structure. Ava and Tommy and I had developed new routines, new traditions, new ways of being a family that didn't depend on pretending everything was perfect. On Saturday mornings, we made pancakes and let Tommy help measure ingredients, which meant flour ended up everywhere, but somehow the pancakes always turned out fine. On Sunday evenings, we had family movie nights with popcorn and arguments about what to watch that usually ended with Tommy getting to choose because he was the most persistent negotiator in the house. I'd started dating again, carefully and slowly, but with a much clearer understanding of what I was looking for in a partner. Someone honest, someone who understood that families were complicated but that love didn't have to be. Someone who could appreciate that I came with 2 kids and a past that had taught me the difference between trust and naivety. The marine engineering business was thriving. Word had somehow gotten around about how I'd handled my personal crisis, and I'd found that other business owners respected someone who could manage complex problems without losing his integrity or his sense of humor. My reputation for solving difficult situations had actually improved my professional prospects. But the best part of my new life was the simplest. I could look at my children and my home and my future without wondering what secrets were hiding beneath the surface. The foundation was solid now, built on truth instead of convenient fictions. Sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and both kids were asleep, I'd sit in my office and think about that moment at Natalie's wedding, when I'd stood up to make my toast. The moment when I'd chosen truth over comfort, revelation over protection, justice over peace. It had been the right choice. Not the easy choice, but the right one. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. The last time I saw Sienna, she was picking up the kids for one of her scheduled visits. She looked older, more tired, like someone who'd learned that actions have consequences and that some mistakes can't be undone with charm and careful planning. "How are you doing, Evan?" she asked, making the kind of small talk that divorced couples make when they're trying to prove they can be civilized. "I'm doing well," I said, "really well." "Good, that's good." She looked like she wanted to say something else, maybe an apology or an explanation or a request for forgiveness. But then Tommy came running down the hallway with his backpack and his stuffed elephant, ready for his weekend adventure, and the moment passed.